Hello and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and I'm very glad you're joining us again today. And today I think you will be convinced that we are doing much in today's radio program to create a better world. And that has a lot to do with our guest today, who is known really worldwide as the Health Ranger. And that's Mike Adams, who is the publisher and editor-in-chief of Natural News. And if you don't know it, now you do. naturalnews.com. Do go there and check it out. I am a blogger there, it happens, and among many, many other really highly qualified nutritionists and health practitioners and thinkers. So it's a real pleasure and honor to be part of Mike Adams' work there on that website, which is reaching hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people literally daily, and he is announcing the latest things going on in the health world, both in terms of how we can take care of our health, as well as what's going on the cutting edge of the interface of politics and health. And folks, it's not so pretty. The Senate, the House are not that well educated, and we are having a heck of a time educating them. But part of today's show is really going to be about educating them, those of them who are listening, that is, or who may listen in the future, and us. And this may be a kind of show that you would want to send the link to your representatives so they can learn how we, the people, feel about some of the legislation, such as Senate Bill 510, how we feel about this on the ground, the grassroots, the people they're supposed to be representing. So we're going to get into that, but we're also going to get into the personal story of Mike Adams and how he has come to become the Health Ranger. It happens to be an interesting story that I think a lot of people will benefit from hearing. So there can be some modeling to take place, and God knows what. It's just interesting to see how people who are motivated to make things happen, make them happen. So along that line, just to say a couple of things, Mike has helped to begin something called the Consumer Wellness Center, an online retail center, Better Life Goods. Sounds familiar. And the popular publishing company, Truth Publishing. Pulling no punches there. And in fact, Mike, are you on the line?
I am, Mitch. It's great to join you today.
I'm so glad to have you. You and I had the pleasure of meeting some years back in Scottsdale at an Amazon Herb conference through John Easterling, if you recall.
Indeed, John Easterling, one of my favorite fans of the medicinal herbal industry.
Truly.
His company doing amazing thing, reaching out to a lot of people.
Exactly. Health, nutrition, and taking care of that Amazon, Mike. God knows it's that important. The lungs of the world, The lungs of the world. Well, I would love to begin. First of all, I'm just so glad to have you on. You're doing such great work, and I've been watching you just flourish over the last few years, and it's wonderful to see. You're making such a wonderful contribution to the world.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that, and I think it's because I stopped trying to care about what people think about what I write. Your whole network there is about independent thinking. And independent thinking is really, that's when I hear those words, I just get completely jazzed up, because you'll find that I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not on one party or another. I am for independent critical thinking about the issues that are facing us today,
Yes.
whether it's health or Fukushima or finance or freedom or whatever.
Indeed, something like rational, critical, objective, reasonable thinking.
That's what we need in our world, but one of the things I've also learned is that, there's no such thing as a completely objective person, right? Everything's relative and everything's filtered.
That's right, exactly.
And part of the challenge of what we're facing today in our world, I think, in sustainable living and sustainable agriculture and sustainable finance is that we are not really dealing with rational people. We're dealing with people who have a lot of preconceived notions that are based on mythologies and misinformation that has to be unlearned before it can be relearned in a more appropriate way for long-term survival of humanity.
Exactly true, Mike. In fact, rational exists primarily as a word in the dictionary. It has very little application to human life. We are emotional beings, and there's a good thing to that. We have passion, we have feelings, we have con gusto, we live life. But at the same time, we do have rational functions. The left brain, for instance, working with the right, and they don't seem to work that well together for so many, especially when there are vested interests. And that's what keeps showing up in our world. We keep seeing how vested interests color and filter people's thinking. And that is a problem that you've put your finger on. And in fact, to tell you the truth, I'd really like to begin with a little bit of your personal story before we dive headlong into the matters of what that interface is between the body politic and the body of health that we are all looking for, because your story helps to outline for people some of what it's like to come from a background that was pharmaceutically oriented and how you broke through that to the other side, if you will, to understanding natural health and nutrition and the role that it can play in health and well-being. Could you share with us a little bit about how is it that you've come to the place that you are right now? What did you go through?
I'd be happy to mention the biggest lesson in all of this that I've learned is that it's important to use what works and abandon what doesn't. Mm-hmm. And that's really the story of my own transformation, because by age 30, even though I was financially successful, I had founded a software company that did very well. I have a high-tech background. I actually graduated from university with a degree in technical writing, for example. Mm-hmm. But by age 30, my health was in terrible shape, and I wasn't happy, and I was nearly obese and diabetic and so on. And
you obese? That's almost impossible. You have a radiant, being. It's shocking. Anyway, let me not interrupt.
Well,
yeah.
But that's because I made a choice at that time to look at what I was doing and say, this is not working. And what I was doing at that time is what most Americans are doing every day, which is eating processed foods, taking a lot of pharmaceuticals, antibiotics, following your doctor's orders if you have a mainstream conventional doctor who isn't informed about complementary holistic medicine, for example. I was doing everything that I was told to do by the authorities, by the government, the doctors, the television, the ads, but I was miserable.
You were such a good boy. You were such a good boy.
Indeed. And from that point, I said, look, this isn't working. And I began to read. I just began to teach myself. And sure enough, as I started to put those elements of learning into action in my own life, I found that I was getting healthier and happier and more productive and had better energy and better sleep and so on. And it just snowballed, and I became really almost like a superfood. I don't want to use the word junkie because that's a negative connotation,
sure.
But I was really, really heavily into cutting-edge nutrition and superfoods, and yet I still do most of that, but now I also allow myself to enjoy a wider variation in my diet. So I'm not 100% vegan or 100% vegetarian, even though I've been those things.
Sure.
But I actually encourage people to enjoy everything that life has to offer.
Yes.
But keep in mind what's going to make you healthy and keep you going down the path that you want to go versus those things that are toxic and unhealthy and will promote, cancer or diabetes or what have you.
So you had diabetes. You were obese. You were a wreck, if you don't mind my saying. And really through your own recognizance, your own study, your own research, and your own discipline, ultimately, what became your commitment to change it all around, you really brought yourself back. You also, on a psychological level, disabused yourself, if you will, really, from the teachings of the orthodoxy, medical and otherwise. And when you distanced yourself and became objective to that authority, that's when you begin to inwardly and physically prosper, and emotionally.
That's exactly right. I really let go of a lot of false information that I'd been taught through public schools, that I'd been taught from the media and from politicians, Because I used to believe in the government was going to help me with my health issues. I used to believe that these drug companies were looking out for my best interests.
Yes.
I used to believe that the local doctor knew everything there was to know about health and was really going to try to help me heal.
We were raised that way. I was raised that way. Yeah. We all were.
But I believe that the food companies wouldn't put something dangerous into the foods.
Yep.
And that turned out to be a complete
I used to say, Mike, if you didn't really think about it much, you'd think that they were trying to kill us, with all the toxins and chemicals and everything else. And now I say, that was some years back, now I say, I know they're trying to kill us.
It's pretty crazy, and
It is.
You can get down to...
They are trying to kill us.
Well, at times I'm convinced of that. At other times I think, well, it's just a bunch of companies that are greedy and trying to make as much money as possible.
Exactly. I'm having a little fun. But your father, he worked in the pharmaceutical industry, is that correct?
Well, my father was an IT contractor who did a lot of work for a lot of companies, including Pfizer.
Yeah.
And my mom used to run clinical drug trials for drug companies. And most of my...
As a scientist?
She's scientifically trained, but she was the overseer of the entire clinical trial. So she would document it and analyze the results and write the reports and so on. And I grew up really surrounded by conventional medicine. And members of my family are pharmacists, and some of my best friends were doctors, and in fact still are to this day.
Yes.
But I learned that their knowledge base, that whole conventional world of medicine, is so limited to a very, very tiny fraction of the total amount of knowledge that's available in the world of holistic medicine.
True.
And if you don't know these things, then you can't teach them and you can't prescribe them. And so what we're dealing with today is really a whole profession of medical professionals in the world of conventional medicine who simply, they may have great hearts, they may have brilliant minds, but they don't have good information.
Right. And they don't even have the internal bandwidth oftentimes to even accept and deal with new good education and information. That's its own conversation. But it's true. It's both a lack of good education and sometimes even the skill set or the willingness to absorb and assimilate that information.
There is a very dangerous stubbornness in the world of medicine today. Yeah. There's a resistance to change, a resistance to progress, really.
Yes.
In most other areas of science, things move forward more quickly.
Yes,
for example,
indeed.
Einstein's theory of relativity helped move us out of the Newtonian era of physics. Almost, coming up pretty soon, 100 years ago is when that all began. I think one of his first papers was in 1906.
Yes.
Or right about that time. Now, but medicine has stayed stuck in the same chemical model, the germ theory, since about that time. And it hasn't moved into a holistic understanding of health.
Louis Pasteur was before that, and it was proven during his lifetime, as you well know the story, by his antagonist, colleague Beauchamp, who proved that the issue was not the germ, the issue was the terrain, the biological terrain, which is measurable through pH. And when it was healthy, virtually any germ could coexist in that being, and without a problem.
The medical authorities today still don't understand this theme of the terrain. This is why there's such a push for HPV vaccines, for cervical cancer for teenage girls.
Yes.
Well, if they understood the terrain argument, they would understand that you don't need any vaccines whatsoever.
Exactly.
The way to prevent cancer is to improve the health of the entire body. And that's a holistic approach. It's a nutritional approach. You can't just vaccinate every different body part and every different organ and against every different germ and hope to create health. It doesn't work that way because the terrain is still the same.
It's nutritional, it's emotional, it's stress management, it's psychological, it's sleep patterns, it's exercise patterns, it's drinking. Look, the truth is, I know Dr. Batman Gelich. I interviewed him actually just shortly before he passed in 2003. He wrote the book, The Body's Many Cries for Water. He submitted it to the National Institute of Health, Mike, and guess what? They ignored it. And he had thousands of patients with peptic ulcers. He proved that water was the solution, no pun intended. And it worked. And he was banished from the medical community. They didn't even acknowledge him. So even just good quality water is a solution, a remedy to many of our ills. He said most illnesses are actually one form or another of dehydration.
Indeed, I agree with that. I'm familiar with his work, and I regret his passing. But of course, his body of work stands on its own. And one of the things that he discovered was that asthma, for example, is the body's attempt to conserve water, because you lose water when you exhale each breath. And when you're dehydrated, the lungs will produce histamine so that they constrict the capillaries, the bronchial tubes and the bronchial capillaries, so that you don't lose water when you exhale. Well, modern medicine looks at that and says, oh, we have a problem. The lungs are constricted. They don't think, oh, the person's dehydrated.
Exactly.
They think they need an antihistamine, and hence the entire asthma breathing industry.
Exactly. And what's also interesting is that new research, it's not so new, going back now some 40 years in Russia and Eastern Europe, shows that our idea of the body's need for oxygen isn't quite the way we always imagined it to be. There is actually a need in the cell for carbon dioxide. And coming up with the proper balance, which is always the key word, you and I both keep coming across that balance is what is needed in all things, moderation. So you can so right now you've opened up your diet, let's say, to what it was when you were just a superfood, let's just call it appreciator,
Right.
And, one can do that after one has established a certain baseline of health and pH balance, for instance, and just overall relaxedness and well-being. So, too, we need this, what is the name of the doctor? Do you remember? I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. It starts with a B. The doctor in Russia. The Buteyko method actually teaches people to balance the CO2 and the O2 levels in their breathing, and he has helped innumerable people with asthma and bronchitis and
I've not heard of that research.
It's fascinating.
It does sound fascinating. I do know that in diving, for example, I'm a scuba diver, or I was in the past. I was trained in it, but you never dive with 100% oxygen. Because you would get drunk with oxygen and you'd probably have a fatality. You dive with a mixture of air to support life.
Yes,
you don't
exactly.
dare breathe 100% oxygen.
Exactly. Let's let everybody know you are listening to Mitchell J. Rabin on A Better World on Progressive Radio Network, and we are spending the hour with Mike Adams speaking about health and nutrition, and now we're about to enter into the subject of the interface of our personal choices in what is supposed to be a free country, last time I looked, and what is going on in the legislator body of Congress and their attempts to remove those free rights of ours to make healthy food choices as we would wish, or even, for that matter, grow whatever we would like to grow at our will. So, Mike, first of all, just again, it's a pleasure to have you on. You've become so knowledgeable about this, and I know you're tracking what's going on with Senate Bill 510 and what is latest to break, which is what's going on in North Carolina. Can you speak a little bit about what's going on there, and then we'll circle back around to Senate Bill 510?
Well, in North Carolina, there was an effort there by a state senator to what he called sort of harmonize the definition of the penalties for medical malpractice, or I'm sorry, not malpractice, but practicing without a license. And the wording on this particular bill was very concerning because it would have transformed homeopaths and holistic practitioners into felons. That was the language, that if they were practicing medicine without a license, they would be guilty of a Class 1 felony. And you can imagine vans full of law enforcement personnel rounding up all the healers. I mean, this is a complete full-on witch hunt situation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we raised this issue along with other health freedom organizations, and there was a massive backlash of protest against the North Carolina legislature to the extent where they were just hanging up on everybody who called.
Really? This was just last week, right? This was actually a week ago today.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And the state senator from who sponsored that bill, of course, became very much aware that there was a lot of pressure, and he actually made an effort to clean up the language in the bill and clarified it so that now the bill only applies to those who falsely misrepresent that they have a license when they don't.
Well, that's a little better.
Yeah. And as I pointed out to him and others, that you have to be really careful what laws you put down on paper, because some prosecutor can completely misinterpret those laws to mean something that was never intended by the original lawmakers. And there's a great example of that in North Carolina, where there was a law passed to have huge new penalties for people who manufacture weapons of mass destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And, we think terrorists and those kind of folks manufacturing sarin gas or, some kind of biological weapon.
Sure.
But a prosecutor used this law to go after a guy who was manufacturing meth in a trailer home.
Oh.
Now, of course, none of us support meth manufacture in trailer homes, but this man was charged with manufacturing weapons of mass destruction.
Oh, my.
And he was facing, I think, 12 years in prison, where everybody else who did the same thing got about 6 months. So it's an example of how laws that are poorly written can get out of control when the prosecutors take them word for word and misapply them.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. How about, would Prozac manufacturing fit into that picture?
You're exactly right. In fact, I mentioned this in an article that pesticide manufacturing would also qualify as weapons of mass destruction. So would fluoride manufacturing, or the dripping fluoride into the water supply. That
how about,
is a weapon.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, that's right. I mean, we know that fluoride was used during World War II by the Nazis to help create submission of their people.
Yeah, it's absolutely true that it was used experimentally as a truth serum agent. People think, that's some old James Bond movie. Well, no, the movie was written based on the reality.
Is that true?
Not the other way around.
Oh, my God. That is wild. Yeah, so in other words, it depends on who you are, whether you are going to be liable for that kind of enforcement of the law.
That's exactly right. It's called selective enforcement, and the way you really destroy freedom in any nation is to pass so many laws that the legal burden is so onerous that everybody is a criminal every hour of the day.
Yes.
And it's just up to the state to decide who to prosecute.
Exactly. And according to what law?
Well, yeah, and according to whose whim and who's the enemy of the powerful corporation today.
Exactly.
And we are approaching that moment in America so rapidly, where everybody's guilty of something written on some law book somewhere, and it's just a question of who gets targeted for prosecution.
You're so right, Mike, and you just brought something to mind. It's almost like the original Catholic thesis of original sin.
Right.
Do you know? It's almost as though that theology has permeated our legislative body, and they're actually unconsciously, I hope, acting out of that notion that we are all damned and doomed, and it's only a matter of time before they find where we have erred from the holy writ of legislative intent. Oh, my God. Anyway, come around then. So this is an important point about North Carolina. You and a group of other health activists activated in such a way as to bring a tremendous amount of attention to that language in that bill that was onerous, that was way too ambiguous, and the senator who had drafted it was willing to turn it around so it read appropriately.
That's correct.
That is really a model that we need to really memorize. What did you do?
Well, we simply sent out action alerts, and this has actually given us an idea of starting an action network of people who just want to be part of an action-oriented email list of important causes for freedom and health and protecting holistic health practitioners and protecting our access to healing foods and supplements and so on, herbs, acupuncture, those kinds of things. And we just really organize and rally action items, sign this petition, call these people, march on the streets with these signs. And this is the vision, is to have more grassroots action for protecting the people's rights against the corporations and the elements out there that really don't want us to have our freedoms.
Well, I'll tell you, we have to really join forces, Natural News and whatever part of your organization and A Better World, because we have a newsletter weekly, and we're very into helping to support and preserve our rights in respect to health, nutrition, agriculture, and any number of other rights that are truly part of our sovereign, inheritance here. So.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, and I know there will be ways in which we can work together, and this is an issue that transcends political philosophy. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, a Republican, Tea Party member, Libertarian, it doesn't matter. Because everybody can see now what's happening, that our basic freedoms, freedom to milk a cow and sell that milk to your neighbor, those freedoms are being suppressed and even criminalized, and you can't grow what you want to grow on your own farm. Without federal interference. You can't harvest a weed, actual hemp, actual weed.
Yes.
That has existed in nature naturally for who knows how many millennia.
Yes.
This plant has been around. Now, if it grows in your yard on its own, you can be arrested. If GMOs fly over, if the seeds infect your crop, then you can be sued by the corporation for pirating their genetic code. I mean, come on. Exactly.
You are obviously opening up the portal to the insanity of Senate Bill 510 and the large, no longer invisible hand of Monsanto. Please educate us. What do we need to know? I know that you wrote an article about the 10 myths of Senate Bill 510. Would you like to go through those, or would you like to just impromptu lay out what you feel our audience needs to know about it?
Let me just hit the major points. Like most bills passed in Washington, the bill is completely misnamed, deceptively named. It could be called the Protecting Innocent Children Act, and it might end up being something that arrests innocent parents who, microwave their dinners.
Yes.
So the name, don't be fooled by the name.
Right.
The food safety bill is not the food safety bill. What it really is, it's the big agriculture monopolistic protection bill, because it puts a burden on small farmers that's going to drive many of them out of business.
It's also called AKA Monsanto Rules Bill.
That sounds right.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's pretty crazy, and it like most solutions that our federal government tries to give us these days. And by the way, I'm not against all government. I think state and local government has a very important role to play. But
sure.
I'm increasingly frustrated with the non-solutions, the anti-solutions coming out of Washington. I mean, if we, I know this is off the topic, but we could talk about debt spending and how they're driving us into a collapsed future. Because of the massive responsibility of handling our government spending. It's approached the level of a crime against America. It's that bad, but I don't mean to get off track.
No, but the point is well made, and what is underlying a lot of what you're saying is a question, which is who rules and why? And what we really see is a corporatocracy. I've been talking about this for actually decades on the air, and in everything I have written, it's a corporatocracy, which means simply that we, the people, do not rule, and the Congress, who is appointed to, or elected, or are they appointed, to represent us and our will and our well-being, are not representing that at all. They are representing corporate dollars into their campaign coffers. And that is it. And there are a few exceptional Congress people, I feel, Dennis Kucinich and a handful of others, who continue to maintain our interests at heart and first. That, to me, is the tragedy. So that being driven into debt is a symptom of the same phenomenal miscarriage of justice and democracy.
Sure. And I agree with you on that. And Dennis Kucinich and Ron Paul are my two.
Me too.
Those are the two guys in Congress who I trust. I trust their integrity.
Me too.
And others have their moments where they might have moments of integrity, but they don't have the track record of really authentic representation of the people like Kucinich and Paul do.
Exactly. In fact, since we've gone this far, I will say this, that during the time of the election, Mike, I had been promulgating on this show and my TV show this notion of purple ticket, no more blue, no more red, and the ticket was one Kucinich and one Ron Paul, president and vice president. I wanted to short circuit the domestic brain, you know.
Well, that's the thing, you know. We need to really eliminate the two-party labeling of our representatives.
Yes.
I mean, what does it matter what name is behind, what label is behind their name? What matters is what that individual stands for. And this, you know, getting back to the food safety bill, this is why the bill passed, is because so many members of Congress and the Senate sold out. And they sold out to the big corporate interests, the Monsantos of the world, the DuPonts of the world.
Exactly right.
These are the companies that control now the intellectual property of the seeds. The seeds that more and more farmers in third world countries are being forced to use. And one of the first things that we did when we invaded Iraq, for example, was to replace their seed system with genetically modified seeds from American corporations.
Is that so?
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that.
Right. That's a really interesting idea.
Well, it's especially interesting because if you look at the history of South America, when the conquistadors came over and invaded much of the South American region, areas that we now know today as Peru and Ecuador, for example, the first thing the conquistadors did was they outlawed the local seeds. You couldn't grow quinoa. You couldn't grow these herbs and these plants because they were part of the religion of the Andean people. And so the Spanish conquerors knew that first you have to destroy a culture, you have to take away their seeds. And then you can inject your own new culture on top of their culture and make them worship your gods. And that's what they did, and that's what's happening with America's imperialism today all over the world.
Interesting. You're also taking away the form of life force that they are relating to indigenously, which, as you well put it, is both sacred to them. The seeds are sacred. It's part of their religious nature and spiritual nature. And it disrupts the deep relationship, a deep abiding relationship between the community of people and their land.
It is a crucial element for any imperialist.
That is really a remarkable comment. Yeah.
Yeah.
I never really digested that, no pun intended. Yeah.
It's really the playbook of how to take over a country.
Yes.
And it's happened throughout history time and time again.
Interesting.
You have to dissociate people from their culture.
Food sources.
You have to take away their food, take away their land, take away their self-reliance, and turn a self-reliant population into mass victims. And then you have power. You control the food, you control the money supply, you control the land. That's where you're in power, and that's how the West takes over countries around the world.
Very interesting. Actually, you're also controlling the way of the growth of fungus and bacteria, which will come in direct relation to the seeds and the crops that are growing. They have their own, bacterial communities. So, of course, right? So we know that the native peoples of this land, many of them died because they weren't accustomed to the bacterial communities, if you will, of the Anglo. And they had no immune system to deal with it.
Well, there's a lot of mythology too about that story in history. They said, well, the natives were suddenly exposed to smallpox or chicken pox or whatever, and they were wiped out. Well, some of that is true, but some of that is also that just what you said, that their own food supply was being destroyed. Their own system of sustenance was being disassembled.
Jeopardized. Yeah. Yep.
And this made them vulnerable to infectious disease.
Exactly.
So, part of that whole equation of how they got wiped out has to do with taking away their systems of food production.
Very interesting point. Very interesting point. Coming full circle, we could discuss this the whole time, because it actually brings forward an element, a dimension of conquest that I actually didn't ever really consider quite like this. I appreciate that illumination. Please.
I want to comment there before you move on, but that
Please.
word is key, because what we have, I believe, in Washington, D.C. today at the federal level is an ongoing conquest of the American people.
Yes.
When the FDA says it wants to come in and determine what you grow on your farm and how you can grow it and what you can export and what you can't, and when the Supreme Court backs that up and says, oh, yeah, the federal government can control what you grow on your own farm because of the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, which doesn't even apply. I mean, it was never even written to regulate things that you do on your own farm.
Mm-hmm.
But the Supreme Court argued that, oh, well, because if you grow your corn, then you're not going to buy as much corn. Therefore, you're affecting commerce, and therefore they can regulate your own corn growth. They can use that justification, Mitch, to regulate anything that you do, your water consumption, whether you're raising chickens or not, whether you're growing strawberries on your own. They could outlaw the growing of home gardens because they say it's interfering with interstate commerce.
And what paragraph, what chapter and verse, Mike, in the Constitution does that actually relate to?
Well, it's just called the Commerce Clause. It's a very commonly referred to section. I don't recall the actual paragraph number, but it's very commonly referred to as the Commerce Clause. And it was originally written so that states could not enact tariffs to interstate trade. So it was actually designed as a way to prevent barriers to interstate trade, not to erect new barriers to trade. So the federal government has actually reversely interpreted that Commerce Clause to mean the opposite of what it was originally written for.
And the Supreme Court actually jurisdicted on this to what you're saying? When did this happen?
Yes, they did. This was in 1937. Let me bring it up here. Let's see. There was a case of the Supreme Court versus Filburn, and I can pull it. It's Wickard versus Filburn, and I can bring up the year for you here. But in this case,
Filburn, F-I-L or P-H-I-L?
F-I-L.
Okay.
B-U-R-N. 1940. Here it is. And in 1940, the court ruled that the government had the right to come into a local farmer and force him to destroy many, many acres of his wheat crops that he was feeding to his chickens. And they ordered him to pay a fine. And the argument was that his production of wheat was interfering with interstate commerce because he wasn't then buying wheat from the other corporate wheat producers. And the Supreme Court ruled that that is completely valid and that the government has the right to determine whether you grow your own food.
I'm getting sick. Excuse me, Mike. I did not know this.
Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution.
Oh. This is outrageous, because what this is doing, of course, is acting as precedent for this current bill.
Absolutely. Many people don't realize the history of what can really only be called government tyranny against farmers.
Yes.
That we have in this country.
Yes.
You see that also in the hemp industry. Why can we import hemp from Canada or China or South America?
Yes.
But we can't grow it here ourselves? Why would we deny our own farmers the ability to grow a crop that we're importing from everywhere else? It makes no sense.
You know, I have, and maybe you probably do know about this, United States Department of Agriculture propagandist film that was made probably in the 30s or so that extols the virtues of growing hemp. Do you know that? I've got to get you the link to this. Oh, it's hilarious. It's these farmers being videotaped, filmed out in Wisconsin, I think, or Ohio, and the greatness of hemp and how it helps our country because they make rope out of it and they make clothes out of it for the military and on and on and on. It is unbelievable. It's basically a propagandist film for hemp. For hemp, by the way, being one of the greatest things that nature has ever produced. And here they are a few short years later saying this is illegal.
Well, it just shows you the complete hypocrisy at
yes,
work.
Indeed.
In these departments, like the DEA. I mean, I'll speak bluntly. The DEA is there to protect the drug companies, to protect the interests of the drug companies. They actually make street drugs more profitable by attempting to interdict in the supplies. Their model creates
Explain
an
how that
underground
happens.
economy.
How does that happen?
If you reduce the supply, you increase the price of every commodity.
Yeah.
And by the DEA going in and seizing pot off the streets, they make pot selling extremely profitable.
Mm-hmm.
They are the ones creating the profits that drive the criminal element of the entire system. And on top of that, the DEA was recently caught actually exporting hundreds of firearms to Mexico to the drug gangs.
Oh, my God.
You might think I'm making this up. But
no, not me. I interviewed Terry Reed many years ago, who actually came to my studio with a bodyguard who had been blowing the whistle on the relationship of George Bush Sr. to then Governor Bill Clinton, who was allowing the CIA to utilize the Mena Airport in Arkansas as a landing strip. You know what I'm talking about?
I do. Yeah.
Yes, for the transference of drugs to keep the Nicaraguan war going illegally, and it was a mess. But basically, it was all drug trafficking in the name of the United States government. So, no, I'm not surprised at all to hear this. I mean, we know there have been many stories about the CIA's involvement in drug trafficking in the large cities of the United States like L.A., Chicago, and New York.
Well, it's really quite astonishing when you get into it, and some of this may sound to someone who's just tuning in. It may sound like that's some kind of weird conspiracy theory, but
no. These are just basic, bold facts.
Like for example, there's only one company in America that has a legal license to import coca leaves, and this is absolutely true. And it's a company that then processes the coca leaves to create the flavor for Coca-Cola.
I was going to say, yes.
As a byproduct,
yeah,
they produce cocaine. Now, this company is called Stepan Company, and they're based in Illinois. And after they produce their cocaine, it's sold to a company in St. Louis that buys the cocaine. And we're talking about 100 tons of raw ingredients every year for Coca-Cola, which produces many, many pounds of cocaine, actually 333 kilos of cocaine a year, by my calculations, is produced as a side effect of Coca-Cola. And that is sold to a company in St. Louis.
333 kilos or tons?
Kilos.
Okay.
333 kilos of cocaine.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of cocaine.
And you're saying this is being legally transacted?
Yes. It's being legally transacted. A company name in St. Louis that buys it is called Mallinckrodt. And all this is legal. They have a special permission from the DEA. And then this cocaine is they say, it is then used medicinally.
Well, in fact, heroin was legal for a long time as well before it was outlawed, and it's certainly a far better choice than methadone. But we're getting a little sidetracked, although although fascinating, but it does continually show the unholy alliance between corporations and the United States government, which is there really to serve us. But you would never know that anymore except for in the most flip rhetoric of our politicians and presidents. It does seems it has so little bearing on the people. So in that light, what are, Mike, the most onerous aspects of Senate Bill 510, and after that, what is it that we can do about it?
Well, the most important thing to realize about this food safety bill is that it addresses the wrong problem. They claim that people are dying every year in America from eating tainted food, E. coli and Salmonella being the top ones.
Yes.
Well, if you look at the CDC statistics, you realize very quickly that the same number of people die in America from being struck by lightning as dying from E. coli and Salmonella poisoning in the food.
Yes.
It's a very small number compared to the whole population.
Uh-huh.
And, why don't we just make a law that bans lightning?
That's next. Yeah, right.
Now, the second question is, where does this E. coli come from?
Yeah.
Well, E. coli, as many of your listeners probably know, does not grow on plants or in plants or even around plants. E. coli grows in the intestinal tract of animals.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you get E. coli from the intestinal tract of animals onto your plants, your onions, your celery, whatever?
Mm.
Well, you have to shovel some stuff somewhere downstream from animal factories to your farms.
That's right.
And that's what's happening. The problem of E. coli and Salmonella is the insanely filthy practices of the factory farming of animals.
Right.
And the beef industry in particular. Now, instead of addressing the cause of this and these just completely inhumane and ethically unacceptable practices in the factory animal farming business, instead of addressing those issues, they say, let's put more burden on the vegetable growers. Well, the vegetable growers aren't causing the problem.
Downstream, so to speak, quite literally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the same things with milk. You know why they pasteurize all the milk? Because most of the dairies are so filthy that their milk wouldn't be drinkable if you didn't just kill everything in it.
Yes. Yes. Including the nutrition.
Exactly. The raw milk farms are really the cleanest dairy operations in the country.
Yes, and
local.
Are they closing? Are they made illegal in this bill? Raw dairy?
Not directly, no. However, there's more scrutiny put onto the raw milk dairies. Most of the raw milk regulations happen at the state level currently, but the FDA could come in now under this bill and make a lot more trouble, just like the DEA does in California, where California said medical marijuana is legal to grow if you have a license, but the DEA says we don't follow your law. We're the federal government. We're going to come in and arrest anybody we want, regardless of whether they're legal under California law. So the FDA could do the same thing to raw dairy farmers.
Now, there have been some very disturbing instances, numerous, of raw farms, raw dairies being invaded, and that really is the word, and closed down by the FDA, armed FDA agents.
These are armed assaults, law enforcement officers in SWAT gear pointing their guns at cheese.
Oh, that's where Swiss cheese comes from.
That's it.
Yeah.
See, these people are terrified of raw milk and raw cheese, and all they can think of is shooting.
Kill it.
They don't know what to do.
I'm scared about. Well, this is awesome. Yeah, right. But the thing is that these instances do not get any media attention except in alternative media. And the only reason we call it alternative is because we're always striving to get a larger audience. And the ABCs and NBCs and CBSs of the world dominate the public airwaves. And they're totally bought and paid for by their commercial advertisers. And we can't get real news there in front of the American people.
No, I don't know any intelligent person anymore who is tuned into the mainstream media. It just that is the dumbed down.
Yep.
It's sort of like the macaroni and cheese diet of the brain. You know, it's like if you eat fast food in the drive-through and and hamburgers and fries and Cokes, well, yeah, you can watch CNN or read USA Today. But for the rest of us who want to be informed, we go to other sources.
Yes. Would you like to why don't you name a few of those sources, since that is part and parcel of the entire education needed? Of course, naturalnews.com and PRN and A Better World, these we know. But, this is a true, intrinsic, organic, if you will, ingredient toward the education of an activist.
Oh, yeah. Well, a great place to start is the Organic Consumers Association. That's organicconsumers.org. I also like the Association of Natural Health, ANH-USA.org. They're a good health freedom group.
Yes.
Of course, Jeffrey Smith at the Institute for Responsible Technology. That's responsibletechnology.org.
Yes.
There's the the Farm Freedom Legal Defense Fund. I don't know the URL on that. They're good. I like the Union of Concerned Scientists. I like some of their information.
Yes.
The Environmental Working Group and cornucopia.org,
nice.
Which is the Cornucopia Institute. Those are all some great sources. I read them all the time. That's where I get a lot of my information.
Yes. Did we lose the connection?
Nope, I'm still here.
Okay. Mike, are you there?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, there you are. Okay. Yes. Okay. These are excellent. We're just about out of time. What do you feel our audience needs to know primarily about this Senate bill, and what would you recommend our doing about it in terms of collective action? I know it's passed. We all know that, but there is such a thing called repeal.
Yeah. Well, I believe we need to repeal this so-called Food Safety Act, and if we want to have legislation to protect consumers from dangerous food, we should really focus on the food additives. I mean, what about the MSG? What about the aspartame? What about the artificial petrochemical color additives that are in the foods? The chemical sugar replacements. If you really want to save people's lives, get the sodium nitrite out of the hot dogs and the sausage and the bacon and the beef jerky. I mean, that stuff causes cancer. And you'll notice that the food safety bill does nothing to address the safety of the food. Yes. What's in the food right now that is killing people? Those are the things that we should be addressing legislatively, if anything.
Exactly. Mike Adams, it has been a total pleasure to have you on the show talking about what you know so well. I so appreciate your good work.
Well, it's my pleasure, Mitch. Thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed chatting with you. This has been a lot of fun. So I hope we get a chance to do it again.
Indeed, we will. We sure will. Give your website again so people can come and visit.
Sure. It's naturalnews.com.
Absolutely. Great, Mike. Thanks again, and we'll be in touch soon.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Absolutely. You too. Remember that the food safety bill is unsafe. That's why we need to act. Thank you. This is good work that Mike has been doing for a long time now, and we're building upon it here at A Better World. Come visit us at our website, www.abetterworld.net. Join our newsletter if you haven't already. We are an action-oriented group after getting educated, and this show and our TV show aired every Tuesday night at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and you can watch it either in Manhattan right on television or through our website, abetterworld.net. It's all easy. It's all there. Please join us and become part of A Better World community, which is so connected to all of these good vibes, these good values, and a commitment to creating a better world. Thanks so much for joining us. This is Mitchell J. Rabin, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.